All right, we're live.
Okay, let's stand for the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As a way of representing, honoring, and creating awareness about our past, we begin our village board meetings by acknowledging that New Paltz is on ancestral land of the Munsee, Esopus, and Lenape people. Please join us in finding ways to support Indigenous communities. Here are a few suggestions. Please share others with us so we might expand this list. We're going to add a couple of items to the business agenda. We have the anti-racism training proposal for the village and town boards as item number 4. Item number 5, proposal for a subsurface investigation regarding the proposed skate park in Hasbrook Park. And that was it as far as additions. Motion to move the agenda as amended.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Phil, do you have a fire department member update you wanted to make as an announcement?
Just a quick announcement that a couple of weeks ago, our members of our all volunteer fire department participated in the annual Ulster County Firemen's Parade, where members are judged as well as the apparatus, the trucks that are brought to that parade. And a record was broken by our members, bringing home 4 first place trophies for best ladder truck, best chief's car, best engine, and then, best grouping of marchers, and as well as the band that we hired to lead the parade. And that just is a testament to how well our members take care of our apparatus. That ladder truck required hours and hours of preparation to and cleaning and prep to take that first place trophy, as well as the chief's car. So just congratulations to those members who participated a couple of weeks ago. And that's not been done in recent memory. I've interviewed a few of our members about that, and just congratulations to them and to our community.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. That's important. It's beautiful to see how careful they are with these taxpayer-owned assets and how much pride our members take in participating in our New Paltz Fire Department.
Yeah, they treat the members treat the equipment as if it's their own, and it's reflected in this.
Yeah, I've seen that time and time again with the chiefs whenever they have a proposal in terms of spending money, you know, in addition to making sure that we have the right equipment, they're very prudent and mindful of the fact that these are taxpayer assets. Any other announcements?
I have one.
Some bats.
So the New Paltz Police Commission, the town continues to seek volunteers to join this commission. There will be 1 meeting per month and a few meetings after initial training. We're particularly in need of folks from traditionally underrepresented communities. And we really would like to see as many people as possible come forward to serve on this vital commission. Anybody who is interested can send a letter of interest with a little bit about themselves to assistant@townofnewpaltz.org.
Thanks, Donna. Anything else?
I have an announcement. Another very important board is our Affordable Housing Board, and we are in need of 1 new member. They meet the 4th Tuesday of every month, so it's not a giant commitment, but it is a very important commitment. and you have to live in the village of New Paltz. And we have a great team right now. We just need one more member. And you can contact Affordable Housing Board at villageofnewpaltz.org to express interest.
I was gonna save it till later, but since we're doing that, the Zoning Board of Appeals needs more members. So again, it's one meeting a month. The meetings tend to be not long. Oftentimes it's an hour, and even less sometimes, and sometimes a little more. It is the second Tuesday of the month, and anybody who's interested can send something to assistant at Village of Newport of newpaltz.org, and that would be greatly appreciated. Or they can
Right.
send it to me, sweisberg@villageofnewpaltz.org.
Great, thanks, Donna. Ariana, can we easily go into executive session with Stephanie? Can you
Yeah,
turn everyone else's mics off except for the boards and Stephanie's?
well,
Need a
you guys
breakout
should go
room?
into a different.
Yeah, we need a breakout room.
Google
Can you
Meet.
do a breakout room? Whatever we need to do, can we do it?
Yeah,
I motion that we move into executive session for the purpose of speaking with our attorney.
Second.
all right, you're all gonna have in your inbox in a second.
We should vote.
All in favor? Aye. I'm gonna get you a better reason. Oh, we're going to executive session for attorney consultation. That's the phrase I would like to use.
All right, you guys should have an invitation in your inbox.
In our Zoom inbox?
No, in your email inbox
I got it.
and on your calendar.
Okay, so we can put this meeting on mute and then,
Yeah, I can mute
Okay.
everybody.
hey, Ari, can you send the same invite to Stephanie?
I'm getting a lot of feedback. I'm hearing all the feedback. Anybody needs to close their Zoom.
Hey, Ariana. You can let us turn our everything back on. It's saying that my video won't go back on.
Sorry, I was talking and I was muted. Yeah. Let's see, I'll ask Bill to unmute.
I'm unmuted.
So am I,
Oh,
and I'm back in.
who made a motion, who seconded?
I motion to move out of exec at 7:30 and Stana seconded.
Tim, you're muted.
Thank you. So did we get any comments from the public regarding the public hearings we have open?
We did not.
Okay, I motion that we close all 3 public hearings.
Second,
All in favor? Aye. I motion that we move the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
aye.
And from the consent agenda, I just wanted to publicly thank Lexi Friedman, high school student, for stepping up to volunteer on the Environmental Policy Board. And thank you, Chair Ted Nitsa, for organizing interns like Lexi. This is good stuff.
Second.
Yeah. So does anyone want to take business agenda item number 1?
I have something to announce.
Okay.
So 2 things, well, maybe more than one. First of all, Governor Hochul rejected the applications for both Dan Scammer and the Astoria fracked gas plants. So these are big wins for our community, Ulster County, the state, our neighbors, especially those who are in traditionally underserved areas. I'm also looking forward, as we changed our land acknowledgement a little bit, to explain to everybody, we are saying Lunape and not Lenape, as a local chief has taught us that for this area, that is the proper pronunciation. And as we learn more, we learn to do better, we do better. So I'm also working on backing up our land acknowledgement more so that it's not just words. So I hope everybody will look at the agenda and look at the 2 links that we have so far, and there will be more to come. These are huge for, climate equity and justice, all of them.
Good stuff. Thanks, Donna. Tom Olson, Chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. You want to join us, and we can commence this discussion about establishment of a local downtown historic district.
Tim, do you want to do public comment first?
I was just about to ask that.
Sure. Let's do, before Tom jumps in, do we have public comment about any other topic? We do not.
I do, Tim. I had my hand up. I didn't know if I should wait for it to be called on.
Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
It's all good.
Go. So just state your name and what community you represent.
So I'm Matt Eiler, and I represent this community, I guess. So I just wanted to, I know we're still early going on the unconscionable rent increase law, but I believe that is on the agenda, not as a public hearing, but as a discussion item. And I think since it's not a workshop, if I had something to say, this is the time to say it, right?
Absolutely.
Cool. So thanks for letting me talk to you as always. I just want to say that, I obviously followed the good cause discussions very carefully. And it's very clear to me that all of you are committed to helping the tenants and the village. And I know you're concerned about unaffordable housing, and that this draft unconscionable rent law is meant to address that. I get all of that. I think, like on the last one, we can certainly work on the language and wordsmith it, and I'm sure we can make progress to make a better law. But I've been kind of thinking about this, and before we go down that road, I just wanted to say a couple things real quick. I think that some of the problems that we encountered as we were discussing the good cause law may come up here as well. Specifically, that it may be vulnerable to abuse by tenants acting in bad faith, and that it could put cost and load on the judicial system. But most importantly, that I think a big concern of many of you was the possibility that it just wouldn't hold up under the law. And, right now they already passed the one in Albany, and that already has an unconscionable rent increase aspect to it. And so to me, it seemed like, you could wait and see how that gets vetted out at no cost to our taxpayers. But I'm not suggesting we do nothing. So here's my idea. When we heard from the landlords earlier, this discussion at the beginning, most of the landlords said that they don't really raise the rents very often on tenants, and that they usually renew their tenants. And that certainly, I know this for sure, myself included, there's lots of landlords that have long-term tenants that are paying below market rents because they have a relationship and because the landlords don't want to have the vacancy, et cetera. So I had this idea, like we could flip the script a little bit and harness those good relationships. And here's the idea. Let's try something new, like something new pulse. So here's the idea. Create a voluntary landlord registry. So this registry gets posted on the village website. It's a public registry. Landlords voluntarily go on there, and they can pledge to keep their rent increases below a certain level. And this would give the public and the tenants the ability to see what to expect from the various landlords. It would give them some clarity on future increases. And it also might benefit some landlords too. Like tenants seeking housing can look at the registry and may favor the landlords that are being the good landlords and making this pledge. And I know that doesn't have the same teeth as the law does, but it has the advantage of being very sort of nimble and efficient, and avoid some of the contentiousness and cumbersomeness of passing a top-down law. So anyway, I just thought it was something that we could consider as an alternative while we wait for this other stuff to play out. Obviously, if it's deemed legal, then I think it's an open discussion. But if it's deemed not, then not only could this work in the meantime, but actually maybe could be a model for other communities actually trying to get everyone to work together. Because I know that a lot of the landlords, even though they get, they're upset about being told what to do, I think a lot of them do care about the community, and a lot of them do care about their tenants. And I think we could get pretty good participation. So a little bit long-winded, but that's this idea I've been kicking around. I would love it if you would consider it. And I would certainly be happy to work on it to refine the idea with y'all. That's my idea.
Matt, we can talk about this more later, but I think what you're describing would not be something that the government would necessarily get involved in. It almost seems like if a private association wanted to kind of organize, you might run into problems though in terms of collusion though, right? It could be like in violation of antitrust laws.
Well, I don't see why that's the case. I mean, I can certainly set rent. I can sign a 3-year lease that has set rent bumps. And it's not that every person is acting individually. We all post what our rents are. I think that if it were a village sponsored thing, I think that, people could participate in this voluntary village program. How is it collusion? So how's that collusion, and you telling everybody not to raise their rents not collusion?
Well, the government does not ever get accused of collusion, but like when private entities collude and get together and decide on, how much rents should be and what an acceptable rent increase is, I think that could be a violation of antitrust.
Okay.
That could just, I mean,
I'm just,
I don't know, it's just like the first idea that jumps out at me. I mean, I think the spirit of what you're describing is very appealing. I like the way you're trying to, be communicative and think outside the box. I don't mean to like poo-poo the idea.
no, no, no.
I think there's definitely something here to research.
Cool.
Okay. Anyone
Thank you.
else from the public want to make a comment? Okay, let's,
Bravin does.
oh, I'm sorry, who?
Bravin.
Okay, Robin.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. And I think I emailed the village board members earlier today. But I took a look at the language for the new unconscionable rent increase law. First off, let me just say, like, we really appreciate the village board for choosing to prioritize tenant protection legislation. I think that is a testament to how important this legislation is right now and the magnitude of the housing crisis that we are in. But unfortunately, because the unconscionable rent increase law doesn't contain any provisions that protect against eviction, it does not address the root of the problem, which is the power imbalance between tenants and landlords. And so if in the legislation, a court determines that a rent increase is unconscionable, there is no mechanism, and I'm looking at the draft now, that prevents the landlord from simply evicting the tenant, raising the rent, and leasing the property to someone else. And so unfortunately, For the Many cannot support this legislation and must oppose it because it doesn't address the fundamental problem. And in practice, the legislation wouldn't do what it's, I'm sure, is intended to do, which is protect tenants from predatory landlords or protect them from being forced from their homes, which I think, which I think speaks to the importance of right to renew laws and good cause eviction laws that give the tenants the peace of mind of knowing they can stay in their homes and negotiate with landlords with that peace of mind. So just want to make sure that that is very clear to everyone, but looking forward to hearing the discussion later about how the village board plans on moving forward with this piece of legislation. But thank you all for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. We'll chat more about it, and we definitely appreciated your feedback. We hope you won't automatically just object to the draft law because it is a draft, and we took a lot of the comments that you shot over to us in real time, moments before we spoke with our attorney and had our attorney opine on some of your thoughts. So that was super helpful that you got those over to us as quickly as you did. And we'll share more about that a little bit later. But it's all happening in real time, and we're trying to take every idea under consideration. Any other public comments? Okay, Tom Olson, we're going to hand you the microphone.
Thanks. Can everybody hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. So Tim and Village Board, thank you very much for giving me a little bit of time. What I wanted to propose tonight is a very specific and somewhat narrower version of what you've been hearing me present on for a couple of years now. And that's specifically to focus on the state and national registered district, which is basically our downtown. And I was wondering, Ariana, are you able to, do you have at your fingertips those maps that I sent? Because if I'm permitted, I can screen share if you don't have them.
You should screen share because it's difficult for me to share my screen and take notes.
Yeah, that makes good sense. Okay, give me a second. Oh, I'm afraid you've disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, you know what? I think I can do it.
Okay, sorry, I would be prepared to do that, but while that's happening, everybody, let me just give you a little bit of background. And Stana, this might be especially for you because this has been kind of an ongoing thing, but basically some of the background everybody needs to know or remember is that in the year 2009, so over a decade ago, the downtown district that you'll soon see on the map was designated as a state and national register district. That's a huge honor for the village, and it took a lot of work to get to that point. But it comes with no additional local oversight. It's purely an honorific thing. It's hard to obtain, but then it doesn't actually have much effect on how local determinations are made. Great, Ari, thank you. Do you know what would actually be helpful first is the map, which would have been one of those other, there it is. Yep.
I would like to tell you that I actually have looked at the maps, and I used to be on the town planning board. I am familiar with a lot of them.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, then I don't
Marked
need
or
to tell you a
unmarked?
thing.
Tom,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
do you want the marked or unmarked version?
I think we can just stick with the marked because it's
Okay.
really just an elaboration of the unmarked. So we've had this district that is defined by the solid black line for over 10 years. Just to give you a little bit of help, there are two dotted sections. If you notice down just east of Wirtz and crossing to crossing Chestnut, there's a little dotted section. And then there's the same thing basically across from Prospect on Main Street. Those dotted sections were removed from our original presentation by the State Office of Parks and Recreation and Historic Preservation. We really didn't agree with that, but at the end of the day, they had the control and they just kind of cut out little sections of the otherwise intact district. The proposal that I want to make tonight is kind of based on the fact that we've been going round and round for quite a long time, trying to figure out how to amend village law. And that, as everybody knows, is a pretty complex procedure, whereas a simple designation of a downtown district equivalent to the Huguenot Street district, which has been in place for more than 20 years, seems to the Historic Preservation Commission and to me the right first step at this point. It's got the advantage of going right to the most vulnerable part of the community and leaving as kind of phase 2 exploration of village-wide design standards, which would have some impact on village code, whereas this is a really pretty simple matter because we already have the basis for establishing historic districts, and obviously we've already done that on Huguenot Street. So let me explain what the green marked part is about. In the various discussions that I've had with Tim and had with you all, we have considered extending the state and national sanctioned district up Main Street to the eastern border of the village. And that's something that I see pros and cons to. I mean, the pros would be extending the oversight and protection of all of our Main Street, right? The cons might be that we're sort of stepping outside what seems more self-evidently a good idea because it's already been endorsed by the state and by the United States that this is a historic district. The other part is over on Wirtz Avenue. That was not part of our original proposal. The more I've thought about Wirtz in the intervening decade, the more I think we made a mistake, and so did the state. Some of the most attractive and historic properties are actually on Wirtz, but Wirtz is kind of a mixed bag of what's been preserved and what hasn't been preserved. So one of the questions that I wanted to offer and maybe discuss just a little bit tonight is the pros and cons of simply sticking with what's in black versus extending it and capturing those two other areas. I guess the last thing I'll say is I feel, and the Historic Preservation Commission feels, an intense sense of urgency around this because development is happening really quickly in the community, as everybody knows. Major projects, both infill projects and new construction sort of on the outer edges of this district are happening really quickly. And the current situation is cumbersome. It's kind of mysterious to developers. It involves, and this has been happening kind of over and over again, everybody's dealing in good faith and trying to do this right, but there's no systematic way for the Historic Preservation Commission to be brought in early. I mean, it's happening, but it's not systematic, and it's not a matter of, if you want to think of it as legal practice, for that to happen. And I think it has the effect of confusing people who want to build or renovate here. It creates, I think, extra work for the ZBA and for the planning board, and generally just doesn't do what a lot of communities do, which is to make this a systematic step-by-step thing where you get the endorsement of the Historic Preservation Commission at some defined point in the development of an idea to change the exterior of a building or to build a new one. The other things that are on my mind in terms of urgency are some of the things that you're actively talking about now. So, you know, the additional dwelling unit proposal, which we've endorsed. I think you've probably seen our memo to that effect. We've endorsed that, but, you know, really are issuing cautions that if this turns into an unregulated dash to create dwelling units, the architectural integrity of the community is probably going to suffer. So we're really feeling some urgency around that. The B1, B2 combination or adjustment is likewise going to shake things up. And then thirdly, just, you know, all of a sudden there's a lot of interest in building in New Paltz, and really major projects up and down Main Street, Chestnut Street, and other places in the village really should be vetted and subject to some scrutiny before they're just accepted as a part of planning. I also think in some ways the discussion that was just offered to you about what to do about affordable housing and what to do about containing housing also should be an argument for thinking harder about what we're doing in terms of design review. So specifically what I'd like to do is urge the village board to move to the point of a resolution designating either the more restricted state and national district or an expanded district as our second historic district, subject to the oversight that's been going on for 20 years, all 20 years of our existence since 2001. We've been doing that on Huguenot Street with, I think, good effect and almost no naysayers or objections to what we've been doing. I'll stop there and I'll be glad to answer questions, or I hope have a little discussion about how you see this question of smaller versus larger district.
I have one quick question that's a clarification. So I see that one of the black dotted lines is within the new green area. The other does not seem to be. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think that is my oversight. I was doing this from an 8.5 by 11 sheet, and I think I just missed it. And actually,
So you would want them both to be part, yes?
I think there's an argument for doing it. You know, the nature of historic preservation is if you don't do it, you can't get these things back, right?
Right.
You can be generous or lenient, but if you don't have anything in place, then it's a free-for-all. Then we end up in an advisory position, and I could go through a long list of projects where our advice hasn't been followed.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Tom, it's Bill Murray. How are you?
Hi, Bill. Hi, good evening. I'm enjoying your bat kittens, by the way.
Yes, they're bat cats.
Please tell me those are photoshopped, because otherwise I can't figure them out.
No, Tom, they're very real.
And I live a block from them. Oh my.
So question is, this is to protect basically a view shed of Main Street. Is that the idea in that one corridor? Or can you tell me what perhaps are there significant structures in this corridor that you're proposing?
Yeah, I think, Bill, generally when we talk about view shed, that's usually of some, at least in historic preservation speak, a view shed is more a kind of prospect of something natural. So like protecting view sheds on Huguenot Street or on Lower Main Street from development across the river would be more of an appropriate use of view shed. But we do have some historically characteristic and important, at least for the local community. Our downtown is our most important accumulation of structures. So the idea is to protect those from demolition, from bad renovation that's not historically appropriate. And viewshed kind of comes into that on the lower part of Main Street and parts of Chestnut, and of course Huguenot Street, which is already designated.
What would be a sort of a equivalent to viewshed as it applies to structures?
Streetscape.
Yeah. Okay. So streetscapes.
Yeah, that's kind of the term that we use. And I guess I would, refer you to, I really am reluctant to name communities, but in everybody's imagination, think about communities you've been to that haven't attended to their streetscape. And that's materials, that's shapes and sizes, it's types of development, it's setback from the street. It's pretty easy to destroy a district or a downtown like ours by not having some design standards that hold development within, reasonable rails.
And what steps need to be taken? I mean, I think this, on initial response to it is very positive, but what steps need to be taken?
Well, I think the thing that really motivated the HPC after, we've been at this probably for 5 years of pretty focused discussion about how we get at this through village code. And I think the feeling is now let's get the most vulnerable part of the community protected by just designating a second historic district. I don't know exactly what the legal procedure is for that, but I think it's pretty simple. The HPC is empowered to do that. Obviously, we wouldn't attempt to do that without the village board. But I think it's a matter of just going into the supporting language in the section that pertains to historic preservation. And I'm trying to remember the number, 921 is coming to mind. So I think that's a question for the village attorney. What is the mechanism by which we have the power to designate a second district as we did the first?
This is Tim. I think what's interesting about having this conversation on the same night that we're also discussing the new B2, which would replace the existing B1 and the existing B2, as well as our proposal for an accessory dwelling unit law, is in both of the proposed laws, we are tasking the HPC with additional responsibilities. Right. So in the B2 law, the new B2, it says no structure shall be demolished, nor the exterior of any structure altered for commercial use, unless such action is approved by the planning board and reviewed by the village HPC. So
yes, that's right.
That is already codifying an HPC responsibility in the new B2.
I agree.
And then which I think is very similar to what we would end up with in this proposed review process. And the same thing, I actually feel like we have to massage this language because it's a little unclear now that I'm reading it again for the thousandth time in the ADU law. But this says no exterior changes shall be permitted without which would extend existing foundations more than 150 feet to accommodate an ADU unless approved by the planning board and Historic Preservation Commission. So the same thing, it's like if we're talking about any addition, any added, whether it's added to a primary residence to create an ADU or added to an accessory building to create an ADU, it would require HPC review. When looking at this map, where I think where we run into an issue is that I would want the HPC to be looking at the stuff that's being proposed in the NBR. I would want the HPC to be looking at what's being proposed in the PIT. And those, the NBR and the PIT property are not in this map.
That's certainly correct. And again, this was because it was based on the inventory of historic structures or the concentration of historic structures. So one can understand why SHPO wouldn't have drawn that line wider, but I agree with you, Tim. Those are really significant parts of how this village is going to develop in the future. Yeah.
And I know, Tom, you and I have, had this conversation so many times, and I've kind of leaned towards, I think the case for HPC review, I would err on the side of broader as opposed to hanging our hat on a SHPO map.
I don't dispute that at all, Tim. I think, my thinking was the SHPO map seems to capture what is currently the greatest concentration of historic properties and seems to be something that would present the least opportunity for a challenge, right? Because the state and the federal government have already said it's historic. But I think you're absolutely right about NBR and the PIT. Those are going to become integral parts of the village, and there should be a systematic design review, which I have to say, hats off to the planning board. The planning board has been routinely coming to the HPC for guidance, but there isn't really a system that tells them when to do it, to what extent our recommendation should or has to be followed. And I think we just have an opportunity to kind of tighten that up, make it clearer for everybody, and maybe take some work off the planning board.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I've always thought was useful in terms of, creating a review process, is taking some of the responsibility off of the shoulders of the planning board members so they can stick to looking at things through their zoning lens. And then, if it's design related, lean on your commission's review.
Right.
And I also like the idea of referring to this as design review and not a historic review. And I know currently your charge is for the historic district, and we like that idea of using the certificate of appropriateness, form that already exists. But I feel like we've had earlier conversations where the word historic, has some other weighty associations which we might not want to attach to this review process, right? It's like you're not trying to make every property in the village look or feel historic. You just want to have a review process so to empower people to make the right choices when they're picking window designs or door designs, so it works with neighbors, or it's not necessarily the expensive thing, but it's the the appropriate thing that can be accomplished so it looks like it fits, and it's not like you're automatically buying a less expensive item. So it's just more of I love the idea of framing it as free consulting, which we've discussed time and time again.
Yeah,
And I think
and
that's
which
that's
it
what,
literally is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Tim, if I could just tack one thing onto your comment. The other thing we would like to do is change our name. I think since we were formed 20 years ago, both historic and preservation have kind of taken on these other valences or these other associations, as you say, that we want to be careful of. And so our ambition kind of in phase 2 or at some later point is to change the name of this group to the Design Review Board and Historic Preservation Commission, with the idea that the historic preservation is more at the level of outreach and advocacy, and the review is really about design. And that I think everybody's familiar with this argument. This is not about taste, it's about historic appropriateness. So I'm prepared for anybody who wants to, anybody from the public who argues that this is just a bunch of people imposing taste on others. It really isn't that at any level, and it's not thought of that way in the highest reaches of how historic preservation is talked about nationally. So we're eager to make that name change and just kind of reorient the mission a little bit in those terms.
I mean, that makes sense to me. So, but where are we at in terms of, if we want to support this process and let's say we get comfortable with a map or which properties are included, how do we get comfortable with deciding which properties get reviewed and which don't get reviewed? I know that you've had some good ideas about, how to make this as efficient as possible, but, we also have to think about, in the future when we have a different chair to your commission, like how would that work? We don't want to create situations that are just making, every project feel like there's another bureaucratic layer that they need to wrestle with.
Yeah, no, agreed. Ariana, would you find it convenient to just bring up the certificate of appropriateness PDF?
Sure.
So to Tim's point, I mean, you're also talking to one of the volunteers who has to read these things and go to these meetings. So we have no interest in extending the process any more than we have to. I would say the majority of people get through in one meeting. If a public hearing is required and the project is complicated or the form comes in late, then we're just kind of legally bound to do appropriate noticing, and that usually takes like a month and a half. But if you don't mind, Ari, just scrolling through the form, I want to just demonstrate that this is not a really complicated thing. There's a section to describe the work in plain language. There is a section suggesting the type of supporting documents that we want. We almost never see an architectural drawing. It's usually somebody's freehand drawing of what they're intending to do. And we usually guide people according, once we find out what they're trying to do, we give them a sense of what we're going to need. And then a series of pretty simple questions on the back, basically having to do with, have you talked to your neighbors? Have you included everything that will help us make a determination? And can you see it? So one of the big things that would govern how we think about Main Street is, to Bill's point, the streetscape, the Main Street side is a lot more critical than what's happening in the alleys or behind the structures in Main Street. And that's a pretty important question. What part of this is visible? And if it's not visible or highly visible, it becomes a much simpler matter than something that the community has to look at for, ever or the foreseeable future. So everybody, that's the form. You're looking at the whole thing. I would guess that most forms come in at about 4 pages, a couple of photographs and a drawing in these 2 pages. Obviously, something on the scale of Zero Place would involve a lot more, but it does anyway because they're going to the planning board.
But Tom, if I need a building permit, do I have to complete this form?
If you live on Huguenot Street, yes. Well, hang on. If the permit is for something exterior,
Yeah, something exterior, building permits, like I need a new roof. So I think what's unique about New Paltz is like, we require building permits for roofs that other communities would not, because we want to make sure that these things are done as safely as possible.
right?
So roof is clearly exterior. Would that require an HB?
No, that's a nice example of how we're trying to keep this process lean. So if, Tim, you have a brown shingle, asphalt shingle roof, and you want to replace it with a brown asphalt shingle roof, even if you live on Huguenot Street, we just call that like for like. You don't have to do this form. If you want to change asphalt to standing seam metal, then you do have to do the form, but that's almost an automatic yes, because that's a historic improvement, right? It's taking the roof to a more appropriate place. So, you know, we do not ask for this form to be filled out for anything that constitutes like for like. If you've got some rotten boards or a porch that's falling off and you're fixing it with the same material in the same place, we just skip it. We just make a note. And that is also—
Is that in the code? This phrase like for like?
It's definitely in everything that we put out to the public. I don't actually have the code in front of me. I doubt the code gets into that level of detail. But as we describe ourselves, we definitely talk about like for like replacement and repair.
Does the
And
board
that-
have questions?
And
Oh,
I just want to say, last of all, that's absolutely thinking with downtown, right? So somebody wants to, I don't know, do a roof downtown, the answer is going to be the same. If it's like for like, we just make a note of it and, you know, register that with the building department.
That's an interesting concept though, because like for like might not necessarily be where you want to end up either, right? There may be a building that had something that, you know, feels inappropriate from a design perspective, and if it was something different, you would prefer they would consider something different as opposed to the
Very
easier
true.
non-review process of like for like.
That's really true, Tim. I think that the underlying thinking is we don't want to be in the business of forcing people to take their properties to some point in the past. That's just, it feels like a slippery slope and a really dangerous thing to do to a community. But in your example, if somebody comes to you and says, well, I'd like to replace it like for like, but I'm wondering about this, if it feels like an improvement that moves the structure to a more appropriate place, we would definitely consult and urge the person to do that and do everything we can to make that easy.
I guess that's just where I'm not sure, or it's unclear to me, who makes those decisions and when. Is it the building department? Is it the applicant? Like, you know, who's deciding whether they're filling out this form?
Well, I mean, in the case of anything that requires a building permit, the building department knows, you know, not a red flag, but it's flagged as a historic property, and they are told to check with us before a building permit can be issued. In terms of things that don't trigger building permits, we're going to have to rely on a certain level of outreach and just publicity to get the word out to the community. And that may take the form of registered letters to landlords that, you know, if this is a historic district, you're going to have to apply for exterior changes. Every spring we send a letter and remind people on Huguenot Street and in the 11 structures that are locally landmarked that they have to do this. So there's a kind of ongoing dialogue or reminder to people who are affected by this. And I would guess that we would reach a point where the downtown property owners would get that same letter.
Does the board have any questions?
I don't at this time.
I feel like it's clear so far.
Okay, so could I, Ari, do you mind going back to that marked map? I think the path forward is sort of two things. One is we would like to have a resolution. Oops, there we go. We'd like to have a resolution soon. Obviously, that's going to also involve public input. So we're going to have to, schedule that or think about that. But then the third thing is to have at some point soon your thoughts on what is the appropriate district. If I'm hearing broad support for the idea, then the question is, what do we do about the details? I think I lean toward Tim's view that going a little wider and being lenient on the edges where structures don't matter as much is a better long-term policy. So NBR, the pit area, I'd like to pick up Wirtz because I think there's some really vulnerable and good stock on Wirtz. And I think there's a lot to be said for just capturing all of Main Street, not all of which needs the same level of protection for sure. So I don't know what the mechanism is for the village board to think about that.
I had a question that you just mentioned something. Tim mentioned this earlier a little bit, but what if it wasn't a district? Do we have a mechanism in place that protects structures that are built before a certain year, no matter where they are in the village?
No such thing.
For what year does it is deemed historic?
It's a little bit slippery, but I mean, there's a structure from the 1950s that's locally landmarked in the village, and it's because it's the only surviving example of a particular architectural style.
Yeah, I know that house.
I think you would, yeah. And I hope you agree, it would be a shame to lose that one house designed by an important architect. It's the only real example in the community. And the then owners were happy to have this protection. But generally, Michelle, something on the order of 70 to 100 years. So definitely most of our downtown falls under that. I could maybe also answer that by analogy, because on Huguenot Street, it's the whole district. Even if your house was built in the 1990s, you're subject to review, but obviously we're not reviewing that the same way we would review a stone house on Huguenot Street, right?
Because they're certainly beautiful, and that there's a house next door to me. I think it was 1876 it was built. My house was built in 1930. I find it very beautiful too, but homes like that I feel deserve protection as well. So just a thought as we were talking.
Yeah.
I'm not on Huguenot, so.
Right, but you live in a house that's beautiful and it has its historic integrity from 1930, and I get that impulse that should be protected too. So we would look at it that way. This house has an architectural character. We want to be careful with what happens to it. It doesn't mean that you can't ever have an extension on your house, but that you need to be guided, to do it in a way that you won't regret and your neighbors won't regret having to look at.
Tom, that look back to 70 to 80 years, some communities look back 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something 70, 80 years? Is that something that's, in our code or?
No, no, and it's not, I mean, I was really just kind of roughing out when, Michelle's house is maybe a good example. I guess that's a little over 70 years at this point, more like 90. But, I think in a community like ours, we should be looking at things, from about that point back. I mean, frankly, we should always be looking at the integrity of everything. A brand new raised ranch has an integrity to it, and people often need help in figuring out what to do if they want to make a change. And as Tim said, we give a lot of free advice on that score to people who live in 1960s houses.
Yeah, so this sort of brings me to 5 Broadhead and what we're attempting to do there. I know that Jacob Weinkoop built 6 houses around the community, and they probably don't fall into this new parameters that you've outlined. Is there something else we could do along those
Yeah,
lines? while we're
there
discussing
sure
this?
is. Yeah, so the commission has the power to designate local landmarks. It's a pretty serious process. We've done it only, I think, 11 times in 20 years. But we can pick out an individual property and give it landmark designation, which can be really good for the owner because anything landmarked or anything within a historic district becomes eligible for certain forms of financial support, grants and loans at the state level that honestly vary a lot according to state budget. But if you don't have that designation, you can't get in line for those things. So we could do that, Bill. One of the problems with the Weinkoop houses is the majority of them are in a condition, I'm going to be guarded about the word I use here, but they're not in a condition that would rise to landmarking typically. We do have a little clause where we can landmark on the basis of an architect or a builder, and there might be some room for doing that. So even if the structure doesn't really look like it's historic anymore, there's latitude to go in on a different tack. So far, we've never done that over the objection of a property owner. We've always had the cooperation of the person who owns the structure. So, that might be new territory for us in that case.
I know on the street.
Sorry, Bill, go ahead.
I know on in my neck of the woods, Prospect and going east up the street, there's quite a number of homes. I think a section of Prospect Street used to be cottages at one point, and now they're single family homes. So there is historic value in just that in itself. I think that how these communities have grown and transitioned into something else. So I was just curious to find out how wide this would go, how far we can take it. Are we going all the way to Henry W. perhaps? Even if you go north of Henry W., there are some homes in there that were built, well over 100 years ago. So maybe there's something additional we can do in terms of this. That's all.
That's sort of what I was thinking in terms of phase 2, is that if we concentrate on the really historically valuable part of the community, and then as a phase 2, start thinking about some basic guidelines and design review principles for everybody else. It's a trade-off though, Bill, because the more restrictive, the more pushback, the less restrictive, the more is going to kind of get done in a way that maybe we don't ultimately approve of. But I think what's not really very debatable is we have a core in the middle of the village that is vulnerable and needs to be protected.
I do appreciate.
Go ahead, Sana, sorry.
I do appreciate that there is already something in there for architects such as Mr. Wincoop or Winecoop. I'm not sure what the correct pronunciation is. That is vital. We have not done enough for the Black community as far as giving what is necessary to talk about the truth of our history, to reckon with it, and to lift up the voices of those who must be recognized. So knowing that Mr. Wincoop or Winecoop took part in building at least 6 homes, like, there's got to be a mechanism for that. There's
Yeah.
got to.
Well, we're definitely, we have some control on what happens at 5 Broadhead, and that's really a great thing that's going to be happening. The plan, I think everybody knows, is to have some signage there and to make sure that whoever is selected, whoever puts in the bid that looks best is really aware that this is going to have to be done with some historic sensitivity. But I agree.
I'm certain, considering who the advisory board is, that it will be handled properly. And I want everybody and anybody who wants to come forward for that project to know that I will talk to you happily. I will talk to anybody and everybody happily about a project in that spot and other projects similarly. And I certainly will do everything within my power and hope that we can get more than signage, because signage is not enough.
Good.
Yeah, the committee will review the proposals. I think that the focus of Tom and the HBC and the design review process is just about exteriors generally, and that's why I feel like even if a wine coop house, if the owner of a wine coop house currently wanted to do a renovation, the review process, I think, could be 2 things. It could be like, well, let's say they want to do replacement windows, so the review process will be like, well, these are, this is the design you should consider, so that it's appropriate from a design perspective. And then in addition to that, because of our HPC, I would imagine they might also, in addition to opining about the correct window design, they might say, okay, well, let's also look at this house through the lens of being historically significant in terms of one of the Mr. Winecoop, who served in a Black battalion in the Civil War, and there's such rich, intense history related to Mr. Winecoop, and I think that would just be in addition to the standard review process that would apply to any house.
Agree 100%.
Yeah, I do too. And I think that, there is a part of our charge that is to advocate for and raise consciousness about historic preservation, Stana. So, typically our month-to-month and week-to-week work is reviewing applications, but there's this other thing that we've actually been pretty locked in on with Jacob Winecoop. A lot of the RFP that went out is actually our language initially, and we were talking with Stewart's early on, trying to help broker that. I don't want to take a thing away from Bill, because Bill was really the driving force, but we were not idle during any of that.
I've been lucky to review all of it, and I'm grateful for everybody's work.
Yeah, good. So Tim, I'm conscious that you've got a long agenda, everybody. What do you suggest for figuring out what seems like the best shape of the district? I'd really
okay, so I want to go. So earlier you said there were 2 things, and one was like, what is the best shape of the district? But what was the second item that you were going to identify as another next step?
So how we go about how a resolution would pass. What would the resolution say? And I think that actually is going to need some advisement from the village attorney. what is it in the code that would allow us to designate a second district, whatever shape it is. I have a guess that the right exists in the section under historic preservation, but I'm not sure. I wouldn't want to presume. And then, that to my mind, that should lead to a resolution, and the resolution specifies what the district is. There's an opportunity for public input, as there would be for any change, and then we move forward.
I feel like I also need clarity on the process, like when an applicant walks through the door and wants to make a change to the exterior of their property, like what happens, who says what, when. I think that would be really helpful.
Okay.
And we should also consider, well, what happens when a property, I don't know, like is there a way then a property does not get reviewed because they aren't forthcoming about exactly what their plans are and what's like for like, or what they want to do? Like, is there recourse? Is there a penalty? Like how, I mean, I think what's interesting about this idea and framing it as free consulting, I know that we've had conversations with lots of developers who have considered making changes to the exterior, and like I've tried to steer them in your direction, and many of them are very willing to go ahead and sit with the commission and receive their counsel. So I think a lot of applicants view it as free consulting too. But what would happen if someone didn't look at this input favorably?
Well, I mean, at the moment, that's kind of the bind that we're in. At the moment, we are advisory to everybody except those 11 properties plus Huguenot Street, right? So there is recourse in those cases, but it's a little bit like somebody who puts in a building permit and then builds something slightly different. There isn't actually that much that the building department typically does at that point, except maybe there are fines and retroactive retroactive applications. I think we would like to avoid the situation where we make concrete recommendations and then somebody walks away and says, well, I'm not going to do that. And that's been happening pretty frequently with some sensitive buildings. Again, I don't really want to say this in a public meeting, but at some point I could walk you through cases where this has happened, where the commission's advice just wasn't followed, or in some cases long ago wasn't taken up by the planning board. Did I answer the question, Tim? I sort of lost what it was.
Yeah, I still feel like I need a step-by-step in terms of,
Okay.
Someone applies for a building permit. Does the building department official ask them a specific question about whether or not they're doing like for like, or something that would trigger design review board?
I actually think it's in recent years, it's been better than that, because we have a really good inspector now. When he sees an application come in from Huguenot Street or one of these 11 properties, he doesn't even have to ask the question. If it has anything to do with exterior, it has to go to the HPC, and he won't issue a permit until it does.
So then maybe it's just that simple. Okay, got it.
Yeah. What's not simple is the stuff that doesn't require a permit. And that's your earlier question, and it worries me. I think it basically boils down to some combination of
what doesn't require a permit that's exterior.
Let's.
Do we have to do all the details tonight?
No,
Yeah.
we don't. Let me confer. I at one point I would have said windows and doors, but the last time I spoke with Corey, the law had changed because there's this idea of the energy envelope, and New York State wants all of that being subject to building permit.
Okay, well, that's another question we should find out.
Yeah. Here's what I'm going to suggest. I can make this a more systematic answer in the form of a memo and get it back to the village board in the next week or two about how the process works, where the loopholes might be, where the objections might be, and maybe also make some suggestions about what the district would look like. But ultimately, we really want your input and ideas on, what the appropriate district would be.
Okay, so we'll wait to hear back from you, but you definitely have to keep nudging us to get this done.
You can count on me to nudge you.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
Thank you so much,
Everybody,
Tom.
thank you very much for your patience. We all appreciate it. All the HPC appreciate it.
Thank
Okay.
you so much, Tom. Thank you for all you do.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so the next item is the draft of the unconscionable rent increase law. Are Bravin and Matt Eiler still here?
Yeah, I'm still here.
They are. I see them
I'm-
both.
Okay,
I think
cool.
Adele and Liz are here too.
Okay, great. So we chatted in exec session with our attorney. We were trying to understand, how this law would work. Would a landlord still be able to pursue a no-fault eviction? And it seems like they would be able to. So we were also asking the attorney to do some research on this idea of, whether protections against retaliatory actions could be included in a law like this. And then we also asked our attorney if they could see whether, the way New York State has outlined how rent control is supposed to work, where you do a survey of vacancy rates in your community, and then you create some sort of board that considers macro factors and then comes up with a max rent increase for, whatever period. Maybe that's what we should be also investigating. I mean, I think we probably should be comparing a few different things. From what I understand, that's generally an expensive process. And that's why, cities could pursue things like that. They could afford to pay a third party to pursue a survey. It would be more expensive for someone like us to do it. But we asked our attorney to do some research on some of those things and share what they learn with our board in the next week or so. So hopefully at the November 10th meeting, we'll have more to report back on what we're trying to figure out. Did I cover everything? Does the board members want to add anything? And if Robin and Matt are here, I don't mind if you guys have a quick question about anything that we just said. I'm fine with that.
So just so I understand, you're basically just saying that you're exploring the various aspects of it with your attorney, and you're looking for some input from your attorney to see if this path that you have initially proposed here with this draft law is the best path, or whether you should be going down some other avenue. Is that a summary?
Yeah, and the other avenue is the framework that New York State already has for how rent control would work outside of New York City. There's an existing process.
Right.
I'm not sure whether other communities have been successful in enacting it or not.
So that's already codified under the state law, under that law that was passed 2 years ago. And that has to do with surveying sort of current vacancy rates and rent increases and things like that, right?
Yeah,
I don't know the details either.
Yeah, I think in terms of the checklist, that's part of the analysis that needs to be performed so that you can support having rent control. Like New York State wants to know that you've done that research before you take the next steps.
You have to demonstrate that it's actually like you need data that demonstrates that it's necessary, basically.
Yep.
Or justified, or whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Robin, did you have any questions or feedback?
Yeah, appreciate you kind of opening it up for feedback. So just to confirm, the village attorney took a look at the Did you have any other kind of substantive things that y'all want to share around the unconscionable rent increase law, or do you just kind of affirm that landlords do have, like, would have the ability to do no fault?
I mean, the challenge with so much of this stuff is that, all of these what if scenarios. So, a judge could agree with the tenant's concern that the rent increase is unconscionable. But then, sure, there could be a risk at some point in the future. Maybe it's, when they walk out the door from the courtroom, or maybe it's, once the next lease term expires, could the tenant just be evicted, for some other unidentified reason? And yes, and maybe, they would be doing that because, they were upset that the tenant ever challenged them about the rent increase amount. So, that's why we're trying to bake in, like, could you put in, something that protects the tenants against retaliatory eviction? But, I feel like that's a shade of gray. Like, is that really going to protect anyone, even if it says, you can't get mad and be mean to me, even though you're mad and you're going to be mean to me, right? Like that. So that's what we're trying to figure out, are there alternatives to this?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, and I guess in terms of the rent control thing you mentioned, is that ETPA expansion that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm mostly familiar with it because I know that Kingston pursued the survey, and I think the data they got back wasn't particularly supportive. And I think it's a flawed process because you basically go and survey the largest landlords and ask them for vacancy data. So, they know what they're doing. So, are they going to give you the best data available? Like, I mean, from what I understand, that's one issue with how that process works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it is like a long and arduous process for a TPA expansion. But yeah, I mean, so it just sounds like the village attorney is going to do more research and then get back to y'all with the research.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we're looking at that as the alternative, but we're looking at that so we understand, the things that we might consider. I think, that's what's important here is we need to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what the alternatives are, as opposed to just jumping.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, no, I definitely have some clarity. I mean, our position just remains that, a combined right to renew and unconscionable rent increase defense laws are the strongest solution. But yeah, as I mentioned, like, looking forward to hearing more from what the village attorney says.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. So let's jump to our next agenda item.
We have a hand up.
We have a hand up.
Yeah, from Liz.
I can't see who it is.
Liz
Hi,
Elton.
it's Liz. Can I say something?
Oh, Liz, you want to ask a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a question. I was reading through the law and I was trying to kind of think through how it would play out. And so if a tenant and you came to an agreement, and me, sorry, as a landlord, came to an agreement and said, okay, well, we're going to raise the rent by $50 a month because we're going to add a washer and dryer or whatever it is. And then they sign the lease, they agree to it. And then let's say 3 months down the line, they get upset because there's a mouse in the house or something like that. Then they could come and say something like I don't want to pay the increased rent anymore. And
No.
that it would be like, we would have to go to court and spend a lot of money to go to court to something that we all actually agreed on 3 or 6 months ago.
No.
How does it play out?
That's not what they're saying, Liz. What we're saying is that if and when you want to raise the rent at the end of the lease for a new lease, that kind of thing, not during the lease that has already been signed.
So let's say you're in the 11th month of a lease, of a 1-year term lease, and you say, okay, so we're going to raise the rent by $50 a month. then at what point would the tenant, because the way it's written, it says they will stop paying you the additional rent. So I'm assuming it's when you're already in lease, right? You're already in
Liz,
contract.
it's super important. This is a draft concept. So, this is like 100 miles away from a law that we would ever present right now. So
No,
we're just trying to wrap our heads around a concept, to see if it would work from a legal perspective, not necessarily get every single nuance correct right now.
Okay. All right, so we'll revisit. that when
Yes, this is literally the first look.
And that's why we're working with our attorneys and, but yeah, I mean, the challenge with these laws is like, we can play the what if game, and it's really hard to play the what if game and simultaneously come up with ways to make sure that, people feel housing secure. So we're trying our best.
Yes.
Thanks, Tim.
But again, the beginning, this is the beginning.
Thanks, all you. I appreciate it.
Okay, moving on to the next item. So we have this proposal to do some anti-racism training. Donna, you want to address what we're considering?
Yes, I'd love to. So let me just pull it up on my computer here. So I'm just going to read kind of what I sent out to everybody. As I have asked previously about what is in the budget for anti-racism training, I'm bringing forth a proposal for discussion at our next board meeting, which is tonight. Given the focus on anti-racism through the work of the NPP, RRC, REAC at the school district, the revolutions about the church on Pencil Hill, etc., we are tasked with action. Our intentions through all of these things are sincere. However, our outcomes so far raise questions about our current capacity and understanding. Therefore, we need to build capacity, and I move we start with studying white fragility with L. Grace Harmon. I propose we do this with the town board, meaning the village board and the town board, the 10 of us. And we will be speaking with them about this at our next joint meeting. This is the most time and cost-effective option at this time. We must use and value our resources here in New Paltz. There will be 3 sessions, 90 to 120 minutes each, with required reading prior to each session. The total cost is $900. There's also an option of paying per person. Again, ideally, we can get all 10 of us to participate, and I am mindful of the logistics of scheduling, but confident we can do this. And hopefully this can be done for more people over time. So the NPPRRC was tasked with working on this as part of the governor's review and rehaul of policing in each vicinity. This is something that we have said we will do. This is something that we morally must do. This is, a lot of the times, a lot of the trainings are very extensive and not everybody has the time or the money. The village and the town don't have necessarily the time or the money to do all of the things, but this is the start. So this is the anti-racism training that we are hoping to do with, again, the village and town boards, and then spread it out to more people throughout the village and town. And this is something that Limina Grace Harmon has done before. For those who don't know, she's the pastor of the New Paltz United Methodist Church. She knows the community. She is a person of color. She has taught this specific white fragility study group many times already. And I can't think of anybody better to do it.
Okay, so I think what we need to do is, and I think Reverend Lamina Grace Harmon has already sent us an email, but I think it should feel more like a super concise proposal where she said, where she could state something like, I want to lead this workshop describing it, how many people and the cost. And then I think what would also be super helpful is if you got 2 other quotes from comparable entities that could provide similar trainings. So we could, compare all 3. It just as a point of reference, it'd be great to compare what the Reverend is offering us, because I'm super excited about what she's offering us, because I think the advantage to working with her is she is familiar with our community. She knows us. I'd be excited to, sit in a room and, have a group conversation that she leads. But I just think for point of reference, it'd be super helpful if we just had like 2 other quotes, so that the town and village boards could say, okay, this makes a lot of sense, and from a quantitative perspective, this is also why it makes sense. So I think let's get the Reverend's proposal and 2 others, and then just put it before the joint board on November 10th.
Does anybody else have anything to say before I say something?
Yeah, are we presenting it at the joint meeting because we want the town to join us?
Yeah,
in
10
this?
Bobby.
Yeah. So the thought was that I wanted us to go in saying, yes, we're committed to doing this. And then say, and yes, as I've stated more than once, the entire village board and the entire town board, as much as humanly possible, to do this all together.
Right. And
Go ahead.
sorry, Stan.
No, it's fine.
I thought there was some concern about having too large of a group.
Too large of a group is anything more than 12, 10 is doable. She prefers 10. She doesn't want it to do more than this 10, but she believes that this particular 10 is perfect.
What particular 10 are you referring to?
The 5 people on the village board
see.
and the 5 people on the town
I
board.
see. Okay.
And my hope was to have us say, we're on board, we're doing this, join us. I can understand why Tim would like other quotes. I am happy to do that. I can put them together tomorrow, probably. I don't know who else is doing specifically this. In all of the time that I have spent looking at and pricing out other things, there is nothing for this price that is comparable. This is the
I know, and
best
that's why.
we can get.
Okay, so here's my motion. I motion that we move forward with Reverend Lamina Grace's Harmon's proposal. But we will, assuming that it's the low bid and it's the best value, and I'm describing value because of her connection to our community. So, I'm more about like kind of just defending our choice. So I feel like if we have those couple of data points, that will help us defend our choice tonight. But like, let's just put those couple of quotes in the file along with the Reverend's proposal.
I love the idea. I'm in.
Okay.
Love it.
So that's that. So you just seconded my motion by saying I love it, and all in favor.
Well, I just point of discussion, just if we could get more details in terms of the meetings. You said 90 minutes to 2 hours per session. Calendar, will it be 3 weeks apart, or some of us
I purposefully didn't put that in so that we could figure it out with them. I'm happy to put in as much detail as you want and as much flexibility as is necessary.
Sure.
I don't think Bill was asking for dates in the proposal. I think he was just like X number of meetings and how long will each meeting last.
Each meeting lasts 90 to 120 minutes. He's asking how many weeks between meetings. That's what he's asking. Am I incorrect?
Yeah, roughly how many weeks between, and then how long are we, and how many total meetings?
Is that what you're asking, Bill?
Yeah, just time frame. So that's a lot of hours. I need to I'm a slow reader, so it takes a little bit of time. And are we doing chapters at a time? The whole
I will put all of that in. You got it.
Yeah,
like you got it.
Yeah.
And this might be a silly question, but this is paid for by the village, correct?
The village and the town. I would think that if they're doing it with us, we're splitting it. And it's $900 total.
I would anticipate that we would pay for this out of the lines that we have allocated for the Board of Trustees and the mayor.
Yeah. Makes sense.
But you know, that dollar amount will be, and I think that the number that was floated, was it, I mean, tell me what the dollar amount was, Donna? Was it for all 10?
Yes.
Okay.
It's $900 total, period. We could
450,
also,
450 per 5 people.
yes.
Great.
And we can also, if you want, we could do it per person. We could massage it a little bit. It is slightly massageable.
That should just be all in the proposal that we get.
You got it.
But I'm motioning that we go ahead in anticipation that the proposals add up, because I agree with you. I think this seems like a fantastic value based on any research I've done, and I know you've done more research than me, because we have looked at this before as a board, and you know, other entities who don't know who we are cost a whole lot more.
And I'm happy to make sure I have it all done by the end of the week.
Okay, perfect. Next agenda item.
Wait, did everybody vote aye? Because there was no, there wasn't a vote there.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, next agenda item, proposal for subsurface investigation of proposed skate park in Hasbrook. So we got 2 bids to do this work. I propose we go with the low bid. I think it was $4,500. The other thing is that this would not be paid for with village general fund or rec fee fund. We've communicated with, you know, the folks who are on the skateboard fundraising committee, and they were in support of having the money that has already been raised and is currently sitting with the New Paltz Community Foundation pay for this work, because this is very important that it allows for the designer of the park to create a design that makes sense with our existing geology and soil type.
Tim, so while the meeting was happening, I got a call from Jason, who's in Saudi Arabia, but he took a look at our proposals and he said that he's worked with both of these companies. So, you know, going with the lower bid is perfectly qualified.
Fantastic. So does someone want to second my motion to second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So, you know, we have this 5 Broadhead RFP deadline coming up on Friday. We've had some folks express some interest. I think what's really important is that, you know, we see what proposals come in, whether we get 20 proposals or 1 proposal. I would like to, you know, get that information over to the committee who will be reviewing all proposals, and then have them take a look, and, you know, maybe they'll make a decision to say, you know, extend the process, go with this applicant. You know, I'd like to lean on, you know, the super qualified people that we have on the committee to help us. So that's Albert Cook, Susan Sesson Cohen, Lamina Grace Harmon, and Stephen Cook from the Village Historic Preservation Committee. They're gonna all take a look at whatever shows up on Friday, and then they will provide the village board with their thoughts. Any other comment or update right now?
I agree with you.
That sound like a reasonable game plan?
Yeah.
Yep.
It's just a couple of days. So if you're interested, you have till Friday, I think, midday to submit your proposal. And then we'll convene the committee next week, figure out time to meet and review what we've got. And as Tim said, they'll make the determination to proceed or perhaps revise and extend.
Sounds good. Okay, so the next agenda item is this zoning map amendment. So there's, you know, this has been something that we've been considering via the public hearing process for months and months and months at this point. So it includes updating the zoning map. So in addition to the change to the B2 zoning and then moving B1 properties into the new B2, we're also going to move a few R3 properties into the new B2, and then take some existing B1 properties that are on Plattekill Avenue across the street from the fire station and put them in the R2, and then take 3 properties that are in the R1 over in the Green Acres neighborhood and put them into R3. And R3 is a zone that would permit something like townhouses or apartment complexes. So that's more along the lines of, you know, what feels appropriate and you know, what we've received as far as feedback from the owner of that property in terms of what they would build. So I'd like to go ahead and ask for a second to approve this zoning map amendment based on this memo.
Second.
Any discussion? And I imagine that we're going to have to get feedback from our attorney to make sure all the I's are dotted in terms of exactly how this is done, because, you know, what Ariana and I regularly learn is that every single thing that we do like this takes more review and involvement than we originally think it does. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And then the next item is same thing, the accessory dwelling unit law. We've had this public hearing open for quite some time. We've shared it with the planning board, the Historic Preservation Commission. We've asked for community feedback. We received feedback from the Ulster County Planning Board. So their feedback, the one thing they thought the law overall was very good as far as the ADU law, but they wanted us to exclude short-term rentals from being allowed in ADUs. But we created a resolution here that says, you know, we understand why the Ulster County Planning Board would be advising us along those lines, but that we think it makes sense to permit short-term rentals in ADUs, because the only way one could have a short-term rental on their property is if it's their permanent residence. So we feel like we've kind of already covered and expressed our concerns about short-term rentals in our community. And I don't know, it really kind of affected me some time ago. I actually was reading on social media about somebody's mom who is really enjoying being a short-term rental host. You know, so I feel like it's a great way for some people to generate some income, you know, from their primary residence. You know, they also might enjoy the social aspects as well as the financial benefits of being a host. So, you know, again, anything that keeps long-term residents in their homes, I think, is a good thing. And that's why I would be comfortable with allowing an ADU to be used as a short-term rental, but only if, and because it would coincide with our short-term rental law, only if the person who resides in the primary residence was a permanent resident.
Yeah, I think that's really the best way of approaching this. I mean, I appreciate the county's input, though.
Yeah, I think their input makes a ton of sense if we didn't have the robust short-term rental law that we have.
Right.
I continue to think it's far and away the best short-term rental law I've seen any community come up with. So my motion is to move the law and adopt the resolution.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And then the next item is the change to the B2 zone to create, and I'm just using this phrase right now as a placeholder. I'm calling it new B2, but it's just B2. So basically all the existing B2 properties will become new B2, and then all the B1 properties will become B2. And this is a change that just would require any new development to be multi-story mixed use, because we're trying to promote and foster community and walkable communities similar to, you know, what we currently enjoy in our downtown. Oh, does anyone else want to add, you know, why we've been chewing on this for so long, and their thoughts on the proposal?
I appreciated talking it through with you earlier this week, Tim, just some of my concerns. And then, as I mentioned to you, I thought a strong checklist, similar to how the ZBA has that checklist for their own things, but a checklist for the B2. And I think it's already kind of baked into there. I'm trying to find my notes on it. I'm trying to, just for the different types of standards that we want to include, I think the HPC would be involved in some of them.
Yeah, so one thing that's not in the existing B2 that we appropriated from the existing B1 is this idea that demo or any change to the exterior, if something's becoming commercial, that it be approved by the planning board and reviewed by the HPC. So I brought that up when we were talking to Tom earlier tonight too. So that's something that was taken from the B1 and put in this new B2.
Like it.
And then the other interesting improvement that we made, and so in the, you know, this zoning is largely taken from the NBR, but the other thing that we added, which is different and I think makes things more clear, is that, you know, we're trying to encourage commercial on the ground floor and housing up above with a 3-story max. But if a developer would like to put fully accessible units on the ground floor, they may. And what's different about the way the Fair Housing Standards law currently works is if you build housing units on the ground floor or in a building that has an elevator, everything has to be built so it's adaptable. And adaptable just means that one could, if there was a prospective tenant who needed, you know, things like, and I believe there are seven things that the dwelling unit could be outfitted for, you know. So an example would be like bars in a shower for someone who would need bars in a shower, you know, that you would have to have those reinforced walls so they could be installed. So what we're requiring is, like, if you're going to build housing on the ground floor and your intention is to market it as accessible housing, it actually has to be fully accessible. And then we went into building standards and made sure that we were using the right terminology. So it's currently referred to as type A, fully accessible housing, as opposed to type B, which is just adaptable. So we're trying to do more to make sure that there's housing stock for people who need fully accessible units. So I think that's a nice tweak to this proposed zoning. So did someone second moving the change to the zoning?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And you know, like what I mentioned before, I'm imagining there may be some other housekeeping items that are required before, you know, this gets you know, codified or sent to the Department of State. But, you know, I feel, you know, because we've been chewing on this for so long, we needed to take this vote tonight and, you know, keep pushing this proposal forward. Okay, so the next idea is the village holidays, the floating holiday for staff. Did we want to talk about that? Michelle, did you want to take this?
Yeah, so let me find my notes here. Oh, so this was based off of, we were talking a while ago about how do we make holidays more inclusive and flexible. And I took a stab at some materials that you sent over, Tim, to me from Rightopia. And I created, so if you open the document, the goal is to give employees the freedom to celebrate holidays more important to them and to make holidays more inclusive and flexible. Looking at the 17 current Village Hall holidays when the offices are closed. And then the new idea one is employees are given 17 holidays in accordance with current contracts, but will also accrue paid floating holiday time. Here's an example. An employee is given one floating holiday upon hire and then accrues a certain amount of floating holiday time per month. The floating holiday must be used within 1 calendar year, not to exceed 4 floating holidays or another number. One of the examples from Rightopia is employees are given 1.85 hours of paid floating holiday time bi-weekly in accordance with payroll schedule. Once an employee has 48 hours, 6 days, they stop accruing until they use the hours. And a floating holiday must be approved to a supervisor a certain amount of days, weeks before holiday and approved. And new idea 2 is keep the 17 holidays and each employee can choose to swap 3 or another number of those days for another floating holiday. This makes it so there are only always 17 total paid holidays. I listed a couple of potential conflicts. For idea number 2, not all employees can do this swapping since offices will be closed. And for either idea, what is defined as, quote, holiday? Example, can an employee use a floating holiday to take off for their birthday, or must it be a recognized holiday? So I tried to think of a few what ifs. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions?
When I was working at Planned Parenthood, we had similar thing where you had one float holiday and then there were X number of established holidays. And having the float holiday was great. You could choose it how you want. And, things changed, I think, depending on how long you were there with some of the other stuff. But I really appreciate the flexibility.
Yeah, I think when we're, the 17 holidays that we have listed, there's some holidays that some people may celebrate that are not part of that 17. So to definitely, figure out, allow the people the flexibility to have that day off. 17
is way more than we got there.
I'm wondering whether we should take this up with the union the next time we do a union contract. That might be the place to have this conversation. And then we can and that's kind of like what we regularly do is whatever we figure out for the union, we then extend it to the non-union staff. So everyone, has a comparable experience.
Yeah. And I was thinking too, if we float it by Nancy too.
That was my next question is, have you asked everybody in the office what their preference would be?
Have I personally? No.
Yeah, Michelle, pick Nancy's brain. Why don't you do that? Give Nancy a call because she's really good with, kind of like seeing pros and cons to proposals like this, just because she's, been doing this for so long.
Yeah, I was thinking she'd be a good person too. All right, so I'll take this to Nancy and report back, and we'll see what she thinks about floating it by the union too. And
awesome.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. That's a lot of work there.
No problem. Thanks.
Okay, so the next item is discussion regarding amendment to meeting rules of procedure.
You want me to give the quick rundown or no?
I mean, basically, you were suggesting that we make it super clear that if people are making public comments that they're limited to 3 minutes and that will be timing it. And then also you wanted meetings to end by 9.
That is not correct.
Okay. What is correct?
Okay, so based on the conversation I had with you as well as others, that we'd amend the rules to say that we strive to end all village board meetings by 9 and will go no further than 10 barring emergency. Sorry, my phone is ringing, God darn it. Okay. So that we, barring emergency, we won't go past 10. And then the rules would be that going forward, all meetings where less than X number of people, and we can choose, let's say 10, whatever it is, wish to make comments on the record, we will be flexible with the time that they're given to speak, and we'll ask everyone to please be as brief as possible and thoughtful about being repetitive when they've heard what they wanted to be said. And just say, like, I second what that person said, and if they have something to add, they can add it or not. And then when there are more than X number of people wishing to make comments, we'll keep them to 3 minutes max with a warning at 2 minutes. And the other thing that I wanted to add to it that I discussed with other people on the board was we should include in this a provision for assigning someone the task ahead of time of putting together a summary of the written comments, because it's very hard to do in the meeting at the moment. And that person would check before the meeting, make sure they got an idea. And then when it was time to summarize, there would be someone who was prepared to make everyone's lives easier and to just give a really clear and full understanding for both the board and the public, because it can be hard when you're trying to do it in the moment for everybody. So if it's done, and certainly you check right when the meeting starts, is have 2 more things come in, have 5 more things come in, whatever. And you just say what the summary is. And this way we can, everybody's time and attention can be respected, and we can make the most of the time, because once you get past a certain time, we're all like, I mean, some people more than others.
Okay, so Ariana included a link to the Google Doc for the current meeting minutes. So why don't you take it and just in the, not the editing mode, but in the suggesting mode, just insert these suggestions, and then we can review it as a board.
Okay, does anybody have anything they want to say?
I'm fine with any of these suggestions in the rules of procedures.
I'm happy to do that. I would like to hear what anybody else has to say.
Well,
I like this. Oh, sorry, Bill.
no, go ahead, Michelle.
I mean, I agree there gets to be a certain point in the evening where it's difficult for me personally to continue to focus when it gets late. But also, I mean, community engagement is so important to me. And I want to make sure that when so the first couple of good cause public hearings are a great example. We had a lot of people come out, and I wanted to hear from every single person. It did create an issue for the rest of our meeting. So I think when we have issues that the community is really, really involved in, that we should be mindful about it. But I feel for the most part, most meetings, they're pretty quiet. But I agree. I think it would be important. It would have been better to have a more streamlined process, and just the importance of the balance of making sure we hear from the community, and also being mindful that we actually are hearing them and we're able to stay fully engaged. So just striking that balance.
Yeah, I like to pick up on that. It takes a lot for some folks to really stand up and talk and make their views known. And I think limiting some people in certain circumstances to 3 minutes is not exactly fair. It may take somebody, 4 or 5 minutes to express what they need to say. I agree that sometimes there's situations where we have 20, 30 speakers, and that can really drag on a meeting, but everyone has a right to speak, and I want to hear them. And as far as, aiming to end a meeting at 9 p.m., I don't think I've ever been to a meeting that ends in 2 hours in the village. I think that's not possible. We have a lot to do. We always have a full agenda. I can't imagine a meeting ending at 9 o'clock, and I don't want to end a meeting at 9 o'clock when we have so many things to discuss. How do you define an emergency situation? I don't know what that is. It could be almost anything. But I look forward to your suggestions in this. We went through this Tim, didn't we go through this at one point a couple of years ago with KT, and we went through this rules and procedures, and we thought we had a pretty good thing going on. So, but nonetheless, I look
the only
forward to
thing I would add is like I feel like most comments are 3 minutes or less pretty
Yeah.
easily. The only reason I like the idea of not telling people that they're being timed, because I want them to feel comfortable when they're making their comment. If they feel like they have to worry about like squeezing everything in, that adds a layer of anxiety that I don't think really serves anyone. Because from my experience, having sat through going on 10 years of public comments, like it's very rare that people actually ramble on beyond 3 minutes. And when I say ramble on, I'm saying like, they got their point across and then they're being redundant. That's pretty unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also in terms of summarizing someone's written comment, that's another tough call. How do you decide?
But we already do that. I'm just saying we have a mechanism for doing it. We already do it, literally.
Yeah, we do it, and I think it's kind of a case by case, because sometimes you see a public comment and sometimes they're cut and paste, like you get the same written comment from several people, and some comments are pretty straightforward, like, oh, they like this project or they hate this idea, and you can kind of just relay that. Or there might be like some nuanced thought or a few different ideas in one letter, and then maybe it makes, you almost have to have to like review it each time.
Right. So here's where, just so you know where I was coming from with all of this. So a couple of things. As far as the summary, that is built in already. That you can read the entire one if it's necessary, and you don't have to if it's not. Right? Which is what we're already doing, but there's someone assigned to do it, and they've gotten the chance to look at everything and have an idea of what they're going to say. So not at the last minute, they're just kind of trying to skim it and do it at the last second. That's much harder, and it's harder to understand from the standpoint of a person who's listening, whether they be a board member or a member of the public. It's very hard to follow that. When one of us is going, well, they said this, and then they kind of said this, and they kind of said this. If it's clear from beforehand, and you know what you're going to say, then you can say it clearly, whether you're reading the entire thing or we had 10 things that simply said this, and then we also had this that got into some detail, so I need to read the whole thing.
But
So
what Ariana does, which is super helpful, is she takes the letters and she just puts them in the public comment, so that we could read them, or anyone could read them before, during, or after our meetings.
That doesn't change, but I'm telling you from what I have experienced in our meetings. And if I'm alone in it, then that's
what
fine.
I'm adding to that is that in addition to what you've experienced, the letters are there, and then you can read them at your leisure, or the public can read them.
Absolutely. That should not change. The other thing, as far as limiting time for people, that's why I said pick a number. So if the number is 30, if we have more than 30 people, then we're going to limit it. Otherwise, do what you need to do. And I have been the chair and been on many boards of many different kinds of places. To me, it is more fair to let people know ahead of time, because we have X number of people tonight, everybody's going to be limited to 3 minutes, and we'll give you a warning at 2, or not the warning, or however you want to tweak it is fine. But that is more fair than saying, okay, that person spoke for 10 minutes, so now everybody gets 3 minutes. Like, that's not fair. That's not fair. I'm
I
trying
don't
to
think we've
make
ever
it
done that
fair.
before. I don't think we've
I-
ever
I-
done that.
Okay, that is what people were saying.
That's
At a
great. I
meeting
know people
that I
were
was
saying
at.
that over and over again, but meanwhile, we were timing every single comment, and every single comment was
You weren't
limited.
at the meeting I'm talking about, so.
I actually was watching the meeting remotely,
Okay.
so I'm
Okay.
super familiar with exactly what was going on. And I
Okay,
heard everyone complaining that this person got to speak longer than that person, and I knew that Michelle was timing each comment, because it happened the very next week too. But I know it was a lot worse that first meeting. I completely agree with you. But you guys were timing the comments.
but, okay. Listen, I'm just trying to actually make something fair. The most important thing is that everybody gets to be heard. That is the absolute utmost, most important thing always, period. That's why I'm saying, if it's more than 25, 30, whatever number we come up with, that it is most fair for everybody to know at the beginning of the meeting, okay, because we have 30 something people who want to comment, we're going to keep everybody to 3 minutes. That's it. And I mean, you don't have to agree. You can vote against my proposal. That's fine.
Yeah, I also feel like you don't know how many comments you're going to get, because what often happens during public comment is you could have a room full of people and no one makes comments, or you get a room full of people and a lot of people make comments, and then they might make comments because of what they're hearing from the other people.
That's
So
true
it's
too.
kind of hard to, like, you know,
All right.
I think you gotta let the chair like run the meeting too.
Right.
think
I was under the impression that other people liked the proposal. If that is not the case, I will withdraw it.
It's not a dislike or like in this situation. I really want you to develop the comments or suggestions in the document if you could.
Yeah, put the suggestions in the comment or the
You got it. Done.
rules,
Not a problem.
so that
Not a
we
problem.
can
Happy to do it.
see how they're worded.
Sure. No
Okay,
problem. I'm
next
happy to do
agenda
it.
item is the letter from Mark Blauer. So it's a grant application proposal for the WIA grant that we're going to submit on November 22nd. I motion that we hire Mark to write this grant.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And then what is the resolution here, Ariana? There's no link.
There isn't a link because I didn't actually receive it. But it basically will be a resolution saying that we want to apply for this grant. So hopefully, by November 10th, we'll be able to do that, and it won't be an issue time-wise. That's like my only worry.
Okay, so you'll just nudge Mark and make sure you get it for the 10th because the deadline's the 22nd.
Right. That's what that's what I thought. So, okay.
Okay, sounds good. Next item is we have to follow the rules of seeker for our $808,000 award regarding the sewer conveyance system project. So I motion that we move the resolution about that project.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And then the next item is a resolution certifying officer for that same sewer conveyance project.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any planning board liaison update?
A quick meeting that I could not attend but watched on YouTube. There was an application before the planning board to turn a temporary carport into a permanent one. So that looks like that's going to go forward. But the big discussion was about 85 North Chestnut, the former Napa building, which is looking to build a ground floor commercial, 2 floors of residential above. A couple of things came up, including some unresolved issues that include a refuse enclosure, adequacy of the on-site and off-street parking, landscaping, signage, and the like. Building design standards and rec fees were brought up. Those topics were discussed, and it will move to a public hearing for November 16th. And that's the report.
Thank you. Any ZBA liaison update?
We have not met since the last time we, as a village board, have met, so there is no update, except that we still need more people.
Do you have quorums, Donna, on ZBA? Is just one person needed?
I have to double check that. I have to double check it. I'll answer you before our next meeting.
Okay, I think that's it. If you guys agree, I motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Happy Halloween.
Yeah.